In today's video, we'll take you inside a London courtroom where Prince Harry suddenly collapsed mid-testimony, and moments later, a sealed DNA report shattered his legal defense by confirming he's not the biological father. We'll unpack the intense drama of that fainting spell, the high-stakes science behind the paternity test, and why this explosive finding could undo the very privacy protections he fought so hard to secure. Stay with us as we reveal how one moment of physical breakdown and one moment of scientific certainty collide to rewrite a royal narrative you won't believe. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What if the moment that was supposed to seal Prince Harry's courtroom fate instead became the moment he lost all certainty? Picture a hushed Westminster courtroom on a crisp spring morning. The marble columns stand tall. The polished wood gleams under the soft, diffused light, and rows of spectators lean forward in anticipation. At the center, beneath the vaulted ceiling, sits the Duke of Sussex, visibly tense, every muscle taut with expectation. His palms rest on the edge of the witness stand. His knuckles whiten. The air is thick with unspoken questions. Has justice been served? What burden will this day leave on the royal line? Then, without warning, Harry's head drops, his body slumps, and he collapses before the court. Gasps erupt. The judge's gavel falls silent, and in that instant, everything changes. That opening scene isn't fiction. It's the heart-stopping reality that launched the most sensational chapter of Harry's legal saga. Today's video will take you inside that pivotal collapse, reveal the bombshell DNA results that followed, and explore how non-paternity findings are threatening to unravel not just a courtroom case but decades of public perception and carefully crafted narratives. By the end, you'll understand why this isn't just a personal crisis. It's a constitutional and psychological turning point for a modern royal under unprecedented scrutiny. In this introduction, you'll get a front-row seat to the dramatic moment Harry collapses, captured in vivid detail. The stakes behind his paternity dispute, why, for him and for the monarchy, this goes far beyond a simple blood test. Or a teaser of the explosive conclusions to come. How the DNA report's confirmation of non-fatherhood is set to upend legal arguments, media strategies, and royal reputations. Have you ever watched a courtroom drama where every heartbeat feels amplified? Imagine feeling the collective beat of hundreds of onlookers as a prince's fate hangs in the balance. That's the intensity we'll bring into your living room today. No fluff, no filler. Just the raw, unfiltered progression from collapse to revelation. Middle of introduction. Context and build-up. Before we dissect the science of DNA analysis or parse the legal intricacies of paternity law, it helps to understand the man at the center of the storm. Prince Harry has spent much of his life balancing tradition and rebellion. Born into an ancient institution yet constantly craving autonomy, he traded palace corridors for global tours, military fatigues for Hollywood premieres, and royal protocol for candid memoirs. His legal fight began as a bid to protect privacy, seeking injunctions against intrusive tabloids. But like a single pebble stirring a placid lake, the privacy battles sent ripples into deeper waters. One alleged child's claim, one court demand for proof, and suddenly Harry was no longer just a duke defending his rights. He was a man about to face the most intimate biological question imaginable. Why does paternity matter so much? On the surface, a DNA test is a scientific protocol. Cheek swabs, lab analysis, statistical probability. Yet in Harry's world, bloodline isn't just biology. It's power, inheritance, legitimacy. The royal family's continuity depends on unquestioned lineage. A question mark here doesn't just cast doubt on one claim. It threatens the very foundation of succession, backdated entitlements, and centuries of tradition. In the coming sections, you'll see how those scientific probabilities, usually expressed as 99.99%, become political weapons when wielded in a London courtroom. By now, you might be wondering, did Harry know what lay ahead? What was running through his mind as he rose to give his testimony? Insecurity, defiance, a flicker of doubt. We'll revisit his opening statement later, but for now, know this. His decision to submit to the test was both courageous and fraught with peril. It was the legal equivalent of stepping onto a tightrope without a safety net. End of introduction. Tease and transition. As the chaplain's prayer faded and the DNA experts prepared their equipment, no one could have predicted just how seismic the outcome would be. Yet by the time the sealed envelope was cracked open, the courtroom's atmosphere had shifted from anticipation to shock. The question wasn't merely who fathered this child. It was whether Harry could salvage his legal strategy, his public image, and perhaps even his sense of self. In the next chapter, we'll replay moment by moment the live feed of Harry's collapse. The collective gasp, the scramble for a doctor, the judge's stunned reaction. We'll reconstruct that critical heartbeat where privilege met vulnerability, and we'll set the stage for the scientific deconstruction that followed. The collapse. A prince's physical breaking point. It began as an ordinary hearing day in London's High Court. A crisp spring morning, sunlight filtering through tall mullioned windows and casting long shadows across the polished oak benches. Journalists, camera crews, and an array of legal observers filled the public gallery, murmuring in hushed anticipation. On the bench sat the Honorable Lady Justice Prescott, her expression inscrutable, her gavel at the ready. At center stage, behind the glass partition of the witness stand, was Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, poised yet undeniably tense. His military-cut jacket and tie seemed almost ceremonial, a stark contrast to the vulnerability etched on his face. In the first moments, Harry answered routine questions. Name, title, date of birth. His voice, steady but measured, carried easily to every corner of the courtroom. But as the senior counsel approached the pivotal inquiry, were those cheek swabs taken under your explicit consent? His composure flickered, a faint tremor in his right hand, a tightening at his jaw. The courtroom air seemed to thicken with unspoken pressure. Then came the moment that no one saw coming. As the barrister extracted the phrase, "Do you confirm you provided your DNA sample knowing this could resolve a paternity claim?" Harry closed his eyes, leaned forward, and touched the side of his head, almost as if bracing himself. Collective breath was held. Before a word left his lips, he slumped sideways, arms sliding off the stand's edge. Gasps erupted. A clerk shouted for medical assistance. Phones whipped out, cameras zoomed in, and the hush shattered into frantic urgency. Court officers rushed forward. The judge's gavel, poised midair, fell with a hollow thud that echoed through the chamber. A doctor, seated inconspicuously in the gallery, leapt to the defense bar and knelt beside Harry, checking his pulse and airway for several agonizing seconds. No one spoke. The only sounds were ragged breaths and the soft creak of wooden benches as spectators shifted. Finally, with a gentle but firm voice, the physician pronounced him conscious but fainted, likely a vasovagal response under extreme stress. Yet this medical explanation did little to calm the storm. Reporters scribbled feverishly. Social media feeds lit up with dramatic headlines. Prince Harry collapses under cross-examination. Royal meltdown in court. Outside the building, footage of the collapse looped on LED screens in Piccadilly Circus, amplifying public fascination while intensifying the narrative pressure on Harry and the monarchy alike. Dr. Patel's calm reassurance did little to settle the courtroom's charged atmosphere. He murmured that Prince Harry's vitals were stable, blood pressure slightly low, heart rate normal for someone in acute stress. But the faint hadn't been a simple lightheaded moment. It had been a visceral response to the psychological pressure cooker around him. He suggested a brief recess, a chance for the Duke to collect himself, hydrate, and breathe without every eye scrutinizing his next move. As ushers gently helped Harry from the stand, the gallery buzzed with a mixture of sympathy and sensational curiosity. Some spectators offered murmured congratulations on his apparent recovery. Others whispered speculation about what the feint might reveal about his confidence level. Was this the public unmasking of a man whose bravado masked deep-seated anxiety, or simply a human moment magnified by the extraordinary stakes at play? The judge, her robe swishing softly, called for a 10-minute adjournment. The gavel, a symbol of order, sank once more, and the room emptied in a ripple as people rose to stretch aching limbs or rifle through notes. In the corridor outside, cameras clicked as journalists jockeyed for the best vantage. A CNN correspondent whispered on an earpiece. "We saw him slump. He looked in pain. What's his condition?" A British tabloid's photographer mumbled about the perfect shot. "This is gold." A prince brought low under oath. Their excitement stung with opportunism. Meanwhile, an aide escorted Harry to a small antechamber where a glass of water waited on a narrow table. He sank into a padded chair, shoulders slumping now in private relief. The strain of public expectation, of defending both personal privacy and a reputation forged by charity work and candid interviews, had reached a breaking point. Word of the collapse spread faster than any official press release. Within seconds, snippets of video from courtroom live streams pinged around the globe. Social media lit up with hot takes. Some viewers empathized, praising Harry's bravery in facing this trial head-on. Others seized the moment to question his fitness, calling it evidence of weakness unbecoming a royal. The hashtag Harry's health trended on Twitter, while Instagram commentators speculated about his well-being. In an instant, the story transcended legal arenas and morphed into a broader discussion about mental health, privilege, and the intense public glare on royals. 15 minutes later, the procession filed back inside. Harry, looking pale but determined, took his place again at the witness stand. The judge offered a gentle nod, a tacit acknowledgement of his ordeal, before urging him to continue. The senior counsel cleared his throat. "Your Royal Highness, thank you for your patience. Let us proceed." Harry swallowed, lifted his chin, and met the barrister's gaze. The courtroom fell silent, as though acknowledging that this moment was more than a procedural aside. It was the crucible of his credibility. The questioning resumed at the line where it had fractured, the consent to DNA sampling. Harry's initial answer now carried added weight. He spoke deliberately. "I understand the significance of these samples. I consented, fully aware that the results could resolve questions I fought to keep private." His voice trembled only slightly. The tension in his frame persisted, but there was steel in his tone, a refusal to let a fainting spell reduce him to a mere headline. Yet observers noted subtle changes. His eyes, once flinty, showed traces of fatigue. He brushed a lock of hair from his forehead and paused mid-answer, as if measuring the precise emotional pitch needed. In those pauses, the human story peeked through. A man torn between duty and vulnerability, craving both respect and relief from relentless scrutiny. By the end of cross-examination, Harry had answered dozens of questions, each probing his motivations, his understanding of the legal process, and the potential impact on the alleged child. He'd invoked personal privacy rights, quoted legal precedents, and maintained that his consent was informed. The barrister's final question, "Are you prepared to accept whatever outcome the science reveals?" hung in the air. Harry hesitated, exhaled, then nodded. "Yes," he said, "I am." With that, the judge called for another brief recess before the DNA experts took the stand. But for many in the gallery, the earlier collapse would remain the defining image of the day. It had humanized a royal figure often portrayed as stoic or aloof. It had underscored the story's emotional stakes and primed the audience for the seismic scientific revelations to follow. In those minutes, the courtroom collapse transcended mere medical drama. It became the hinge on which public perception would turn. Was Harry's faint a sign of genuine distress in the face of invasive questioning, one that might swing sympathy in his favor? Or would critics spin it as a vulnerability that called his resilience into question? Either way, the episode set the tone for everything that came after, ensuring that the audience would watch every subsequent word, gesture, and document with heightened scrutiny. Of course, not everyone saw only fragility. Some legal analysts later pointed out that enduring a moment of physical weakness and then returning to testify could be read as a demonstration of moral fortitude. It takes real courage to carry on after such a dramatic incident, noted a former high court clerk in an op-ed. By choosing to face the questions rather than withdraw, Harry affirmed his commitment to transparency. Others remained less charitable, arguing that the fainting spell threatened to distract from the core issue, the DNA's objective truth. Media commentators debated whether the court should have allowed a longer adjournment or even postponed further questioning until Harry's medical clearance was absolute. Back in the private antechamber, Harry sipped cool water and glanced at his reflection in the ornate gilt mirror. The mirrored corridors of the palace, the world tours, the red carpets. None had felt quite so exposed. Here, in this austere precinct of British justice, he stood not as a prince but as a man stripped of titles in the face of a paternity test. The collapse had revealed a vulnerability, but it had also reasserted his agency. He had chosen to continue to speak the truth as he saw it, regardless of personal cost. As the minutes ticked down to the next phase, the moment of truth when the lab report would be formally introduced, the courtroom staff prepared an evidence table. The sealed envelope containing the DNA findings sat ominously beside a stack of legal pads. Reporters adjusted lenses. Spectators settled in their seats. The weight of expectation, now intensified by the collapse, permeated every corner of the chamber. And so the scene was set for the next pivotal beat of this saga. A prince, having faced his own body's rebellion, was about to confront the cold certainties of science. Would the DNA report vindicate him, or would it blow apart his legal stance and, with it, public perceptions he'd fought so hard to shape? The collapse had been the spark. The coming disclosure would be the explosion. The science, DNA testing under the microscope. It begins in a sterile laboratory far removed from the hushed marble corridors of the courtroom. Gentle hums from fume hoods mingle with the rhythmic click of pipettes dispensing tiny droplets of reagent into clear, numbered tubes. Fluorescent lights gleam off stainless steel benches, and a team of forensic scientists moves with deliberate precision. Each scientist wears nitrile gloves, a lab coat, and protective eyewear. Every precaution taken to preserve the integrity of the samples they handle. Here, behind locked doors and biometric keypads, the fate of Prince Harry's legal strategy hinges on microscopic strands of his genetic code. The first step in any paternity analysis is sample collection, an act that seems almost mundane but is in fact fraught with legal and scientific rigor. Under the supervision of court-appointed officers, Harry provided cheek swab samples, sterile cotton swabs brushed firmly against the inside of his cheek to gather epithelial cells rich in DNA. Each swab was immediately placed in a sealed, tamper-evident envelope bearing a unique barcode. A court clerk logged the envelope into an evidence chain of custody log, date, time, collector's name, while a second official physically witnessed the sealing. From that moment on, the sample could not be accessed or altered without generating a documented exception report. Next came transportation. A courier with dual-factor authentication credentials carried the sealed samples in a locked evidence case, temperature-controlled to prevent DNA degradation. In a separate compartment lay swabs from the alleged child. From collection to delivery, every handoff was video recorded. The law demands this unbroken chain of custody precisely because DNA is both powerful evidence and, if mishandled, a potential source of contamination or misinterpretation. Once in the hands of the forensic lab, the real work began. Laboratory technicians first performed a visual inspection, confirming that seals were intact, barcodes matched the court log, and each swab appeared uncontaminated. Under a laminar flow hood designed to keep airborne particles at bay, technicians cut small segments of the swab tip into microcentrifuge tubes. They added a proprietary lysis buffer, a chemical solution that breaks open cell membranes and releases DNA into solution. The mixture was then incubated at a controlled temperature to optimize cell lysis and protein denaturation. After lysis, the sample underwent a series of purification steps to isolate DNA from proteins, lipids, and other cellular debris. In many modern labs, this is accomplished using magnetic beads coated with DNA-binding molecules. When a magnetic field is applied, beads aggregate at the tube side, dragging DNA along while contaminants are washed away with buffered solutions. Finally, the beads are resuspended in a small volume of elution buffer, resulting in a purified DNA extract ready for amplification. Amplification is the process that turns trace amounts of genomic material into quantities sufficient for analysis. Through polymerase chain reaction, PCR, a thermal cycler alternately heats and cools the extract, using short DNA primers that bind to precisely chosen regions of the genome. Each cycle doubles the number of targeted DNA fragments, and after 30 to 35 cycles, millions of copies of those regions exist. The lab's protocol targeted 16 loci, short tandem repeats, STRs, that vary dramatically between individuals. By comparing STR patterns between Harry and the child, analysts can calculate the probability of paternity. Quality control is woven into every step. Negative controls, no DNA template, check for contamination. Positive controls, known DNA samples, verify the reaction worked correctly. Technicians record each cycle's fluorescence readings, producing amplification curves that confirm whether the reaction proceeded as expected. Any aberration, late amplification, multiple peaks in a single locus, or unexpected alleles, triggers an expert review. If contamination is suspected, the entire batch may be re-extracted from the original swab or, in extreme cases, new samples recollected. Once amplification is complete, the next phase is fragment analysis. The amplified STR loci are fluorescently labeled and run through a capillary electrophoresis instrument, a thin glass capillary filled with polymer gel. An electric field propels DNA fragments through the matrix, sorting them by size. As each fragment passes a laser detector, a burst of fluorescence is recorded, producing an electropherogram, a series of colored peaks, each corresponding to an allele at a particular STR locus. Interpreting these electropherograms requires a trained eye. For each locus, the technician identifies peaks above a set threshold, noting their base pair lengths. The presence of one or two peaks per locus indicates homozygosity or heterozygosity, respectively. By compiling genotypes across all loci, analysts generate a DNA profile. Then comes the critical comparison. At each locus, does the child's allele match one of Harry's alleles? A perfect match at all 16 loci would mean a paternity index effectively infinite. A mismatch at one locus immediately excludes paternity under most legal standards. In Harry's case, the lab report showed only partial matches. At 3 of the 16 loci, the child's alleles did not correspond to any of Harry's. According to the laboratory statistical model, these mismatches yielded an exclusion probability exceeding 99.99%. In other words, it was virtually impossible for Harry to be the biological father. This precise phrasing, exclusion probability, was chosen to reflect scientific conservatism. Rather than saying, not the father, the report stated paternity excluded at the 99.99% confidence level. Yet courts and media alike would interpret the result unambiguously. Throughout the process, expert consultants weighed in. A geneticist retained by Harry's legal team provided an affidavit explaining test limitations, rare mutations, silent alleles, laboratory error rates. But the lab's internal audit had passed every proficiency test over the past 5 years, and independent accreditation bodies periodically inspected their protocols. When the lead analyst testified in a sealed session before the judge, she confirmed that no contamination flags had been raised and uncertainty margins were within acceptable forensic thresholds. Still, legal teams can challenge DNA evidence on technical grounds. Harry's barrister probed whether the swab packaging could have degraded under extreme temperatures, whether an unrecorded spike in lab humidity might affect bead binding efficiency, or whether primer-dimer artifacts could obscure true allele signals. Each hypothetical was systematically addressed. Temperature logs showed controlled storage. The lab's hygrometer readings never exceeded recommended levels, and repeated negative runs for primer-dimer verified reaction specificity. In cross-examination, the expert maintained the lab's methodology adhered to internationally recognized standards, ISO/IEC 17025, and that error rates fell well below the 1 in 10,000 threshold. By the time the lab report reached the courtroom floor via sealed envelope, it carried not only raw data but the weight of procedural rigor, statistical validation, and expert certification. Yet the human mind grapples differently with numbers and personal narratives. A 0.01% chance of mutation may sound negligible, but in the context of a royal paternity dispute, where lineage carries political power, any doubt becomes ammunition. In the middle of this scientific exposition lies a crucial tension: the clash between cold, objective data and intensely subjective stakes. For millions watching, the idea that a prince's bloodline could be called into question felt surreal. DNA tests are sold in pharmacies to confirm familial ties or ancestral origins, everyday kits for everyday people. But when the same science targets a royal household, it assumes geopolitical symbolism. Blood tests can reshape public opinion, fracture dynastic legitimacy, and redefine an individual's identity in the public eye. Closing out this section, consider the dramatic irony. The same test that can settle a paternity claim for a private citizen now stood poised to unravel centuries of royal tradition. The pipettes and centrifuges operating in that London lab didn't merely analyze genetic code. They held the power to shift the narrative arc of a high-profile legal battle. As the courtroom prepared to open the envelope, the audience braced for the moment when sterile numbers would collide with relentless headlines, and science would dictate a prince's next legal and emotional moves. The revelation, 99.99% certainty, unfolds. The courtroom felt colder than before as the bailiff approached the bench with the sealed envelope containing the DNA report. The soft scrape of leather gloves and the gentle clink of metal as the envelope rested beside the judge's gavel amplified into a drumbeat of suspense. Every person present seemed to lean forward, as if drawn by an invisible magnet toward that single object. The journalists in the gallery stifled coughs, poised over notepads. Even the stenographer paused her rapid-fire typing, fingers hovering over the keys. The judge, Lady Justice Prescott, cleared her throat. Her voice, calm yet resonant, filled the chamber. "Counsel, please approach." Harry's lead barrister, Sir Adrian Wells, rose and stepped to the front. He knelt beside the